Oh, and thank you very much for joining us on this new chapter of Agenda Dad. This is the third of the three policy areas that we're looking at in this round of Agenda Dad. We've previously looked at perinatal paternal mental health and all the assets in terms of the video and the chat. They're on the website for Future Men and being shared over Future Men's social media platforms. We after perinatal paternal mental health, we then looked at paternity leave, and now we're moving into the topic of birth registration, which is a topic that I think is really key, really pivotal, and very, very is a big topic and one that's perhaps not that easy to talk about. So I'm very keen to open this topic for discussion. As usual, this is being recorded and again will be shared through the various channels, the website, and social media. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Gibbs from the For Baby's Sake Trust. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Steve, I'm going to start the screen share and share the presentation that we'll walk through. And here we go. So just let me know, Steve, when you want me to move on to the next slide.
Lovely, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I think the first thing I say, to give an overview, we're a charity, as you'll see as we go through, that holistically deals with both parents and the baby is our centric focus to this. But I think working with the baby, obviously, we're working with fathers very much in that maternity process. So while we're not specifically targeted, we do inclusive that, and I think that's very kind of why Chris and I have had contact over a couple of years now. Chris, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, that's right.
So yes, so if we go into it, give a very quick overview of what For Baby's Sake does, and then link it into the topic of today. So a charity responsible for creating and developing For Baby's Sake, which is an evidence-based therapeutic trauma-informed program which addresses previous barriers to achieving successful outcomes, such as failing to provide whole family response to domestic abuse. So effectively, we work with an individual practitioner for each parent, and we work the 1001 days. So that's from baby's conception to when baby's 2 years old. So it's a very intense, as you can imagine, with an individual practitioner over that period of time. So Chris, I think the next slide has got a short video.
Oh, I beg your pardon. That doesn't seem to have come across, Steve. Can we move to the next slide while I see if I can figure out how to get the video to come up?
Okay. It explains the journey.
I beg your pardon.
Oh, there we are.
Oh, hold up. But it's not playing as a video. Just a moment.
Oh, Chris, we practiced this, didn't we?
Yeah, we have done extensively. Steve, I'm gonna have to try to figure out how to show the video because this has come through as a PowerPoint, but there isn't a video icon on here for me to click through.
Chris, what about if I briefly just try and share my screen?
That'd be fine. I'll stop the share here.
Love technology. You've disabled the.
Oh, I need to make you a co-host. I beg your pardon. So now you should be able to share the screen, Steve.
Thank you.
The first few years are so important.
Is that coming through?
As a person,
yes.
Up in those first few years.
Both my mum and dad probably had their own challenges growing up. Certainly my mum did.
My dad was an alcoholic. He was very angry, very depressed.
things were good and then they'd be bad, and there was a lot of instability.
I was a teenage delinquent, stealing cars, selling drugs, just making a nuisance of myself.
I learned to be quiet and keep things inside, and then really escape my imagination, and that's where I came alive.
I met my girlfriend. It was kind of like in the movies.
It turned my world upside down. We had that bond.
Within 2 months of that, she was pregnant. I think we both kind of went into panic mode.
It was very stressful. The idea of being homeless and pregnant, where are we going to get the money?
We started having quite bad arguments.
And he put his hands around my neck until I couldn't breathe, which is what led us into For Baby's Sake.
I kind of came into the program thinking that I might just broken beyond repair.
The practitioner, she helped me find so much clarity. It triggered me to a very dark place. Obviously, we were dealing with domestic abuse, but it didn't feel like we were just pointing the finger.
He was very respectful, listened very carefully to what I was saying, and just helped me come up with practical solutions.
To be able to work through these self-destructive patterns, make some peace with the past, putting tools in place to keep me safe and to keep him safe too.
At every stage, we had someone that really was trained and knew what they were doing, explaining to us what our baby was going through. Then we had more space for us to figure out our relationship.
It's allowed me to heal and come into myself. What are you doing? It's given me confidence to be a good mum.
I can be a bit less erratic now. I can live a normalish life and have a family.
He has two parents that want to do whatever it takes to be the best parents they can be for him.
He's had the best start in my family as far back as anyone can remember, and that is not an accident.
I don't know how many times the two of us have said thank God for baby's sake. It's been life-changing.
Wow, Steve, that's really powerful. One thing I just wanted to pick up on there was that sentiment of the best start in life in the family for as far back as they can remember. That idea of an interruption of potentially challenging destructive patterns. So just want to sort of salute the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I think a couple of things to pick up on there is those are the genuine voices, and I have to smile every time I watch it, and I've seen it numerous times, should we say, because I
Yeah, I'm back here then.
yeah, because I recognise the voices and the journeys. And the other thing I think in context of this meeting, obviously we are a very targeted charity and not inclusive of everybody in terms that the criteria is around domestic abuse and the mother being pregnant. So I take it on board that it's very specific, you know, silo within the overall work that you do. So, but I still think as we go on, it will be relevant. So I think some of the differences, the key difference in the For Baby's Sake program, which has been recognised, is that we don't have perpetrators. We have people who have carried out unhealthy behaviours. We have bi-directional. We take that on board, obviously with a safeguarding umbrella, but it includes men. So we've been referenced in the Myth of Invisible Men, which some of you may know, and it's one of the very few programs where we actually work with the father equally as with the mother in the case. Featured in the Safeguarding Practice Review Panel report, which came out in 2022, and I think as a consequence of the work, the Nick Critchin Award for Family Justice we received as well. And one of the things I should have said is we're based in Hertfordshire, Essex, Bedfordshire, looking to be in Durham fairly soon. We're in Lancashire and Blackpool, where there are huge areas of deprivation and issues. So we are kind of national, but we're not. We're in pots within that nationality.
But I also understand, Steve, that you've been referenced on the BBC recently.
Yeah, today, 1 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 10 o'clock, we're on the news, and it's part of a national programme of foundations work, which has been done with the Home Office to actually review whether our type of baby-centric work works, effectively for the children and for the parents. So there is a report on there. Alison Holt, who I think a quite well-known reporter, she came and interviewed us for that. But that's on at BBC News today, apparently.
Yep, fantastic.
I should make a point of avoiding those Pacific time channels in case I feature. So, what's unique in terms of for Baby Safe program, whole family response. So, is the whole family obviously centric around domestic abuse, working individually with the parents? So, the two practitioners will work totally individually. So, in this instance, Dad will get his own practitioner, and that will be confidential. And that work, and also practical support as well. And we work with dads who are in prison, where there's a likelihood that they'll come out and they will have that contact with their baby in the future. We support supervised contact, unsupervised contact, where there's an order in place, and also try and create a healthy relationship for both parents so that contact can be as normal if they're not together. The therapeutic element creates a meaningful, trustful relationship, and it's about guaranteeing the relationship between the practitioner and the individual parent. So you build up a relationship. I'm sure you can imagine working with somebody on a weekly basis over 2 years. You really get to know them, their strengths and their weaknesses, and help support them. Trauma-informed approach. So a lot of the work centric to the whole program is around an inner child model, which looks at the impact of the parent's own childhood and what their triggers are and what they carry forward and what they don't carry forward. I think one of the key things is, and I've said it before, that that's all right, Chris, leave it up.
Oh.
The dads are treated exactly the same as the mothers in the process. So they are a parent exactly the same. And whether they come with domestic abuse or not, part of that is having that connection to offer change. And that's really what we want. So, Chris, next one. One of the tools that we've come up with, which we can go through very quickly, Chris, is an emotional safety plan. And this was devised around supporting dads, particularly so that they're inclusive in the maternity birth process. And there's you can see that one there, fairly straightforward. Obvious. The next one, Chris, is again, and as you'll get from our program, the baby's needs are centric to everything that we do. And the incentive for working at the dads we work with is making change so your baby doesn't experience any of the domestic abuse that's gone on, and breaking that cycle, really. It's generational sometimes. Thank you, Chris. Again, sitting beside dads in this instance and supporting them to make the change rather than directing them towards change or what is needed or words like that. We just sit beside them and support them to make the change.
Okay, Steve, before we
you were going to do a preface to this, Chris.
Yeah. I just wanted to share some overall statistics that I came across when preparing for this session on birth registration. So just as a very high level, the current policy around birth registration is that in couples where it's opposite sex couples that are not married or in a civil partnership, i.e. there's some form of registration, mother receives de facto parental responsibility and then has to invite the father to also be represented on the birth certificate so that they are represented in terms of their parental responsibility. So I wanted to just provide some statistics about changes in family structure. So from the Office for National Statistics, in 2021, there were about 3.6 million cohabiting, i.e. unmarried or civil partner registered couples. That's up 144% from 1996. The number of dependent children living in family structures where opposite sex couples are not married or in civil partnerships has doubled from around 539,000 in 1996 to 1.2 million in 2021. That comes from a paper written called Common Law Marriage. But despite the rise in births taking place outside of marriage or civil partnership in 2021, there were 29,010 sole registration births. Sole registration meaning only the mother's name on it. And that equates to 4.6% of all births. And that actually is a figure that has fallen consistently for the past 37 years. So what I'm saying, or what my understanding of these statistics is, and I'd love to hear what other people's understanding is in the chat, is that there is an increase in the number of children being born outside of marriage or civil partnership, but there's also an increase from these parents to have both names registered on the birth certificate. So there's something that I understand, which is like society is changing. There is a potential rejection or dismissal of the formal registration processes around marriage or civil partnership. But despite that rejection, there is still a recognition that both parents have a responsibility and rights towards their children, and these couples are doing kind of the right thing, if you want to use that sort of judgmental terminology. But equally, one of the things that came across through some of the preparation for this was that we don't have a picture of the fathers involved where there's a sole registration because we don't know who they are. But we do have a picture of the mothers who are on the birth certificate as sole registrants. So sole registrant mothers are more likely to be young. Median age is about 22, as opposed to around 31.5 for married mothers. They tend to have lower income. 20% of them are under 10,400 per year, and 16% receive income-related benefits. Many experience poor health indicators, such as a lack of antenatal care, higher smoking rates, at about 63%. And it might be that some of the fathers who are not accounted for as under that process of sole registration are also facing similar challenges. So I just wanted to set that scene before Steve goes into this segment here.
Thank you, Chris. And that leads me really to think that, again, I need to put this in perspective, that because of the criteria for engagement on our program, our numbers are relatively low, and obviously working for 2 years, it's quite time consuming. So our numbers are relatively low. I want to put that in context with these figures. So if we're working with, I think, somewhere between 50 and 60 within the year. So the figure of 8 fathers had PR withheld is actually quite a significant percentage. Of those, one that we know and we've supported has been to court and has been added to the birth registration. I thought it'd be useful, and I spoke to all my colleagues, and what are the reasoning behind withholding PR? So one of the ones that we come up with is paternity is disputed. And Chris, to pick up on your point, this is very much within the younger parents that we work with. That's quite a common factor there. The other one, the perceived risk of further contact with the mother. So the mother has decided the relationship has ended. So therefore, one of her kind of in her own concept of safeguarding is that if father doesn't have PR, then she won't be forced into any contact. Obviously, we would work around for the baby. It's not about that. But in the moment that we validate the feeling that the mother has around that. And that's one of the reasons given. I'm sure teaching to suck eggs here, but family pressure, huge family pressure, especially for the young mothers on the program, not to involve the father. And again, that's seen that if you don't allow PR, then that will create further barriers for the dad. And again, that builds on to exclude the father from the child's involvement. We have a case remarkably where the confidentiality comes into this, that the father has not been informed of the baby's birth. And unfortunately, that's not something we can do. Obviously, we're working on that, and it has to be realistic as well, because obviously he's going to know that the baby's born at some stage. But you know, it just highlights for me the extremities that some people will go to not even do that. And one of the key factors is in a lot of the parents that we work with, the mothers particularly rely on their maternal support, and if the decision's made there by the grandmother of the baby that dad's not to be involved, then you know, our parents are quite often living with their parents and things like that, so they, you know, they go along, they rely on that maternal support and fear they would lose it if they went against the maternal grandparents' decision and registered. So
Well, that sounds like there could be a level of family coercion
oh
around the
yeah,
mother.
absolutely, Chris, and but also in the context of that, sometimes and it probably going a bit off topic, but certainly in our field, children who have grown up through the care system and things like that are totally reliant on their providers, and if we can get them to go back with their maternal parents, they will be supportive, but they would have been in the care system for a reason to start with.
So
So
in the, oh, sorry, Steve, go
we're
ahead.
going to,
I was going to ask you, in this slide, you say that one of the fathers who had parental responsibility withheld successfully challenged this and then has been added to the birth
yeah.
registration. Of these points that you've made here in terms of the reasons for withholding parental responsibility, what needed to happen in that particular case for the father to be added to the birth registration?
They had to go through the process of DNA because that was because it wasn't as simple as that. There's a lot of the other factors were in there, and they had to be overcome for the father to do it. But I think, without saying, you know, too much about how amazing it was, I really do think that in that instance, the dad would have found it too much of a minefield without having our practitioners sitting next to them and supporting them through that process. And also we found some pro bono legal support and things like that as well, because as you all know, when you go into these fields, it becomes financially you know, incredible the amount of money these resources take up. So yeah, we found some pro bono support to do that. So sitting beside him. So, but the hoops had to be in, and also on the other side, my colleague was still supporting the mum, and that would have been around continually evidencing the need for dad to be involved.
So, so this is an interesting thing, because when I would, again, in the preparation for this, there seemed to be a few core visions and views that were coming through. There was a real view that fathers are a protective factor in the development of a child into adolescence and into early adulthood, and that is a reason for revising the current legislation around birth registration. But there was another view that was very much fathers need to be on the birth registration so that they have their rights, but also so that they then are held accountable should there be a relationship breakdown and there's a need for child maintenance support payments. And I will say that I can understand from a perspective of ensuring that in the case of a relationship breakdown, that children are still financially supported. But it did also feel like that second stream of thinking around child maintenance was very much like, okay, dads, if they're not on the birth certificate, will always opt to do the wrong thing. It felt quite sort of chastising. That's how I saw it. Whilst also understanding that there is a need to financially be responsible towards your child. You know.
Yeah, I think, Chris, I would go with the first one there. Obviously, we have safeguarding, which is the main umbrella, overalls everything we do. But certainly part of our program is inclusive for the dads to be part of play, to be engaging, to set that example for their children and their babies. And we see it that, provided with that proviso that it's safe to do so, we see it's imperative that dads are part of their children's lives, without a doubt.
Yes, yeah. I just want to. I know that we'll come to more of the questions later on, but Owen has raised a good question about just clarifying some of the language. When we say withheld parental responsibility, do you mean officially by statutory services or court, or by mother not agreeing to conduct joint registration of child's birth?
Yeah, the second one, and because we're still working with them, but completely separate. We're obviously aware of that, and my colleagues will obviously exchange information for safeguarding. And the mother just, I think if I remember rightly, there was some admission that it would took place, but it was continually held off, and then just didn't happen. So, I mean, you could say that it was an omission on her part, but I think realistically, it could be seen as an intention.
Right. Okay.
And certainly that's how the dad felt, quite rightly.
Right. Right. So moving on.
Okay. As part of the For Baby's Sake program on lots of different groups, but one of them is finally Hertfordshire has joined together all the key agencies, and we've got the task group, as you can see there, for inclusion of fathers. Opportunities for engagement in health visiting and midwifery pathways, review of universal and targeted programs for dads, review of the screening tools available for dads, and a bit like the emotional regulation plan that we went through earlier. Why hasn't that always been available? It's certainly been available in maternity for mums. So we're bringing it on board for dads. Develop a questionnaire to gather feedback and experiences of local dads, what they want. And I should premise this with that this is a Hertfordshire-based group that we're working with. Research on the views of dad. Icon. We do a lot of work with dads on Icon about babies crying, and again, without deviating too much, the figures around Icon and deaths that occur to young babies. I think it's going to quote me now. It's a very high percentage of dads that carry out this behaviour. So our argument is, well, where's the input for dads about Icon and the ways to recognise the baby's crying and make it a safe environment, and to offer support for dad whose babies are crying, what to do, that it's natural, and to support that. Review of services available for dads, that's overall. And also not just what's available for dads, but how are we getting the message out there? How are they finding that these services available? And I interviewed a lot of dads about their first maternity visit and who the midwife addressed. And it was invariably mum. And they were invariably just called dad.
Yep.
Whereas the mum tended to be addressed by her first name. And obviously all the letters, etc., were always sent to mum. And that's an ongoing thing we're working with midwifery on.
Yeah.
The baby app, Best Buddy, Baby Buddy, which I'm sure you've seen. So, and then I think, Chris, we've got the next one is the combination. Yeah, the combination of all this. And I was at the Hertfordshire Pub Watch meeting today of all the licensees in the county, and these posters they've all agreed to put up in the pubs. We've also got them in all the rugby clubs, football clubs, and we're trying to expand out. And if you click on the QR code, that expands to all the available services.
Oh.
Will that link through, Chris?
No,
No, it doesn't. Sorry.
No, it didn't. Sorry.
I can send it through as a
Okay.
PDF that'll open up. But that lists an expansive services that are available for dads with one click of their iPhone on their PR code, and that program's continuing to develop.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
thank you.
Well, Steve, thank you for the overview of the work of For Baby's Sake Trust, and also sharing some of the experience of working with fathers who are not on the birth certificate and birth registration. I'm
I
just
mean,
going to go.
sorry, Chris. I appreciate you got to get on very quickly. I just want to say thank you to
That's
everyone.
okay.
And I realise that we're non-specific to the topic that you specifically targeted today, but I would want to say that we also deal with and work with dads and support them with the frustrations of not being on the birth certificate and the emotional and mental health that has an impact on.
And Steve, can you clarify what the challenges might be for a father if they're not on the birth certificate? What does that mean that they can or cannot do?
I think you're probably going down a practical thing, Chris, but I think for us, I would come back and say that initially it's emotional.
Right.
And in the case of disputed, um, you know, parent, they start to doubt themselves, mental health, and that's kind of where we focus. And their mental health deteriorates, so their physical health deteriorates, their work-life balance gets interrupted, and a lot more of an emotional impact to them. On a purely physical level, if they're in a relationship that's they're not together anymore, they have major problems getting hold of supervision and things like that. And also, are you still there, Chris? I've lost you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, my screen's gone.
Okay.
There we go. And one of the other things is we have to live with, or the dads live with, is that paper monster. That's quite often that something comes up for us that everybody will quote, "Oh, you're not having PR because look, you've got these convictions, or you were involved in this incident," and things like that. And mental health just deteriorates very quickly.
Yeah, sure. Oh, and you have your hand up.
Sorry.
Yeah, hi guys. I just thought, given we do some of the similar work to Steve, and For Baby's Sake, with dads, we hold fathers, but many of the dads prior to that level of need, prior to there being a domestic abuse incident or concerns around domestic abuse, we support young dads or dads who may have more additional needs in the community, and we come across many dads who are not on the birth certificate of their children and don't have PR, and have to support many of them to go through the process of applying after the birth registration has occurred. For some of the reasons that Steve highlighted there, paternal or grand maternal gatekeeping, and wanting to separate things out. Poverty is still a factor within this. People presenting as couples, or even knowing where the father is, feel as though they may be financially worse off and not have access to the same level of benefits or support in society that people who present as a couple, even if they're not cohabiting, would get. So there's a risk there. There's also just the reality, and this links to a question that Ahmed put in the chat around kind of like the raising of the legal age of marriage. So whilst we've seen a decline in teenage pregnancies in this country over recent years, we've kind of like that's been married up to the development of longer acting reproductive control methods. Those people from kind of lower socioeconomic groups, where we know that younger parents statistics is higher, parenthood is a way out of poverty, is also a way of establishing a sense of worth within society beyond what you could maybe achieve through your career or through your work. What we can all do is try our best to be good parents and make the next generation's lives better. If you're not being educated and supported to understand your role, both as a mother and as a father, and how collaborative approaches to parenting, regardless of the relationship status between those two parents, are there, that lack of education, alongside a lack of a framework that says we expect this minimum level of involvement from both parents, and we don't expect either parent to frustrate the other's involvement. If we don't set that expectation, we will all sink to a lower common denominator. So I think we see that challenge, and to your practical question about what can't a dad do, well, you won't be able to make legal decisions about what happens to your children. So when whether it be about your school, your children's education, their health, if they become unwell, decisions about where people can live, or just having your say. Now, practically what having your say means doesn't mean automatically everyone includes you, because as we know, anyone who's got kids at school, if you even if you're living with you're a family unit, the letters will often only get directed to one parent within that home, etc., etc. So we need to fight for improvements in communication across the board to recognize two parents or both parents or whatever your familial setup is, and allow you to opt in or opt out of that level of contact and consent. And the only reason for me that should be a barrier to any of a child's legal parents being involved is a concern for safety of the well-being of that child or those around it. And the standard for proving that, the rigor around that proof has to be a lot higher than it is at the moment, because it's at the moment based on suspicion and risk, which means a lot of people who have no ongoing needs are cut out. And for those who are just kind of on the crux or on the edge, where there could be a moment where if we help them, we would reduce that risk. But at the moment, we're just marginalizing and sidelining people and saying that they're too risky. We haven't got anything to offer them, so let's leave them over there. And we're just creating more risk in my mind. So, you know, beyond the practical decisions about what you can get involved with as a non-resident parent in the lives of your children, there's also kind of like the moral implication that we're saying we only need one parent's consent or one parent's view. Therefore, it's only one parent's job. The only thing we'll pursue you with as a man legally in this country for is your financial contribution, which is not good enough. Anyway, there are questions in the chat that I could highlight that could pull some of this out if now's a good time to highlight that, but I'll be led by you.
Yeah, but I just want to pick up on that point that you made there, Owen, because I think, you know, as I said, when I was looking at this topic, and I really saw two lines. There were very distinct lines in terms of the discussions around birth registration. And you'll notice that I put in the chat a resource to because there was really a lot of movement around 2007, 2008 to revising this policy around birth registration. And in that paper, there was a very clear line of engaged fathers are supportive. If fathers are on the birth registration, they are much more likely to be engaged. So there was a kind of quid pro quo relationship by making it easier for fathers to be on the birth registration. This is an identifier of engagement, and it supports that framework. So there was that line of discussion. And then there was this other line, as I mentioned before, which is like, well, in the event of a relationship breakdown, there needs to be the legal repercussions for having the father maintain child maintenance support and financial support to the children. So, which I'm not disputing this. It's a question of kind of intention, really. Is our intention to support fathers to be engaged no matter what the structure of the relationship is, or is it primarily for the purposes of child maintenance payments, you know? And I think intentionality is quite an important aspect of this. But
Well,
Owen,
and also, you know, you could make a case to that exact point that would say many of the fathers who are struggling with birth registration are often from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and groups. So therefore, their contribution financially to their children after relationship breakdown is not as significant to many men who have got parental responsibilities but end up in disputes with their ex-wives or current partners about their financial contribution. In fact, one could argue that the material in-kind benefit of having fathers actively involved in the hands-on parenting of their children is financially, if you could quantify it that way, a much more valuable input than just their money alone. And I think if you measure that over a period of time and you ask children, they would say that too. I think there is no dispute in the research that says actively involved fathers bring massive benefits to their children, more than just financial upkeep. Both are really important. Both are really important. And through our practice, we impress all of the time on the fathers we work with the importance of contributing towards the upkeep of your children, and that both parents have a responsibility to do so. But it does keep coming up as a barrier for many dads who feel the system isn't fair and that people are only interested in them for their financial contributions, which leads to more adversarial interactions between separated parents.
And I think, and this, not to make this a dialogue between just Owen and I here, but I think also whilst that figure that I quoted earlier in the scene setting, 20% of sole registrant mothers are under the age of 22. That's a significant minority. And if you think about the life course for many people in the UK, that 22-year-old mother might have a life expectancy into the late 70s, early 80s, i.e., another 60 years. So this is a time to really wrap around those more vulnerable families to really do the interruption that Steve, you were talking about right at the beginning with the video, which I couldn't get to work, but you did.
Interestingly, Ahmed made a good, interesting comment or question in the chat about the changes in legal marriage age. So whilst we've seen a reduction in total number of marriages generally, we've also changed the age from a safeguarding perspective to 18. So then that, he asked the question, does he feel as though that will affect the number of people who are getting support? For me, it speaks to a need to offer more support and education information to those younger parents at that earlier stages in their lives about their responsibilities as well as their rights as parents. But that is an additional change that's been brought about to safeguard young people from forced marriages, but also doesn't necessarily recognize that there are certain numbers of people in society that are going to choose to become parents young, or are going to choose or not, are going to become parents young. What do we put in place at that time for them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just looking through the chat here, so we've addressed some of Ahmed's points here, and Owen, your point about withholding PR. Richard, you make the point that the law is not kept up with changes in society, where over 50% of couples are not getting married or entering civil partnerships. Would you feel comfortable just to elaborate on that a little bit, Richard, and also sort of talk about the experience that you have from Families Need Fathers? You're on mute at the moment, Richard. Let me see if I
That better?
Yeah, there we go, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, so I had a quick look at the legislation, and it seems to me the legislation has been written in the past around the idea that everybody was married.
Mm-hmm.
Very few babies in the past, 50 odd years ago, it was a stigma to be a bastard. So if any, now, you could describe 50% of children as bastards because their parents aren't married. The law hasn't kept up with changes in society, where people think it's okay to have children out of wedlock, out of a civil partnership. So in my example, the man who struggled to register his birth, he was unmarried. So even though he had two other children, and he was on the birth certificates, because he hadn't married the woman, he couldn't go and register the birth on it. If he'd been married to her, then it would have been acceptable for him to register the birth. But because he was unmarried, the registration officer in Kent wouldn't accept the registration.
Right.
Even though the law required the registration within 42 days. And the question is, how are you supposed to register a birth when the mother has died in childbirth?
Yeah.
I mean,
And it is that sort of concept that the law hasn't kept up. The other one I often get is when relationship deal with in Families and Fathers, when relationships come to an end. Now, if somebody's married or in a civil partnership, then I'm able to tell the fathers, well, you're going to have to file a divorce petition, and then you have to go, if you've got any financial assets like a house, you're going to have to go through financial remedy of divorce. But if you're unmarried, well, one, there's no divorce anyway. You haven't got to file a divorce because you're unmarried. But the problem is, again, society hasn't kept up with 50% of over 50% of people in unmarried relationships, and therefore they don't have financial remedy provision like a married couple would have. And so they have to go through a bit more complicated thing. If they have like a house, they have to do something called tolata, Trust of Land and Trustees Act proceedings, a type of financial. But so it's the whole concept that the law of the land hasn't kept up with social changes in society.
And I think that's an excellent point. Owen, you want to elaborate further?
Agree, totally. I mean, and that is a description of the fact that the marriage law was not set up to govern people's relationships or romantic dynamics or their parental responsibilities. It's a contractual agreement around the distribution of resources and who's responsible for what. And not only is it 50 years old, it's 500 years old in terms of the gender roles within the marriage contract. It's been updated and revised to reflect women's rights within that, and women not having to get permissions from other sets of men to seek a divorce or not having to be battered, which is great. But actually, we as a society are choosing to eschew some of the bulkiness of those contracts, but are not replacing it with what the government has set up for us, which is a civil partnership. You don't have to be married in the church, is what the government's saying. You don't have to go through all of that, but you do, if you want to protect your rights, your children's financial future, have to enter into some sort of agreement. So even people sitting below a civil partnership have to understand, and we need to do a better job at educating people, young people in school, when we're talking to them about sex and we're talking to them about relationships. This is a key part of the relationships discussion. We can't shirk our responsibilities here and go, well, because of the taboos in society, eventually they'll be shamed into getting married or having a relationship. No, we've removed that, rightly so in many people's views, level of shame and stigma, but we do need to replace it with an education about the implications of not having your ducks legally lined up when you enter into a parenting arrangement. And we need to invest in support for those who need it more. There's no legal aid now for people in relationship disputes or breaking up in relationships. So there's a lot more leaning.
There is, if you've got domestic violence.
Your child's known to Child Protective Services. So
Yes.
there's a very small window of people that will get that support, and the large majority of people who are breaking up relationships won't meet that criteria and have to do it for themselves or lean on charities like For Baby's Sake or Future Men to get that support. And there's less and less of that about. So I think Mary's question is really pertinent and reflects yours, Chris, which is that what are the revisions in the law that we could put in place to kind of improve this situation? And the 2007 legislation was very close to being made law under the last Labour government, and I don't see why they couldn't revisit that again, just making sure that we're protecting the vulnerable in society, but make a different expectation.
Something I wanted to share from a personal experience is a lot of people get confused what a civil partnership is. They think they're in a civil partnership. And I had the case with my ex-wife. I've got a divorce order that says my house is sold if my ex-wife gets remarried or cohabits for 6 months. And about 4 years ago, the law changed to introduce heterosexual civil partnerships. So I contacted the court and said, look, I'm a bit worried. My ex-wife's engaged to be married, hasn't yet married, but what happens if she enters a civil partnership? And the court amended my court order to introduce the concept that my house would be sold. But in a part of the process, my ex-wife opposed the change in the order, and the reason she opposed it was she thought she already was in a civil partnership with her fiance. And it had to explain to her by the judge, no, you're not in a civil partnership until you go down that registry office, put up the notice for 3 weeks saying you want to enter a civil partnership, and then you enter a legally binding contract called a civil partnership. If you're not, you're just a couple. You're not married and you're not in a civil partnership. And 4 years further down the line, she's still in that position that she says he's her partner, but they've never actually gone down because they know she knows the implications that immediately she signs on the dotted line to become Mrs. or whatever, that then activates the sale of my house and I get all my money that's locked away in my house.
Wow,
fair point.
Well, Richard, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that sort of honesty and openness. And I think coming back to Mary, the question that you're asking, which is a really that's what we're here to do, is to try to think about what revisions could be made and what are the challenges. Now, obviously, we're not going to do that over Zoom. But having this conversation, marking the conversation, sharing this conversation with others widely, and adding to that is the whole idea behind Agenda Dad. So, but within that, I think it's fair to say there are going to be instances where actually safeguarding is paramount, and potentially there are more instances of safeguarding considerations that might need to be made towards the mother, and potentially from the father. But I really want to hasten to add that it's not one direction. Steve, as you mentioned earlier, there are many instances of domestic abuse and violence which are bidirectional. And my understanding is that as there is more survey data, more analysis that's going on, at a very qualitative level, that there's a picture of more bidirectional abuse and violence than may have at first been considered. And I think that there are obviously degrees of abuse and violence after which there probably is going to be no more compassion. But up to a certain point, I don't think anybody enters into a relationship to then end up an abuser or being violent. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit Pollyanna-esque about that, but I would like to believe that that's the case anyway. And where that does happen, perhaps there have been some challenges in those in the lives of those individuals that have made that more possible. But thinking about a process whereby both mother and father, again, there has to also potentially be an idea of DNA where father is concerned. Mother knows that that is their child, whereas father might not know that that is their child. So that needs to be considered, as well as the safeguarding and risk thresholds. Owen, I'm going to come to you in just a minute. I can see your hand up, but I just wanted to highlight as well Steve Woodward's point about and Catherine. They've been having an interesting conversation there about where the registration happens. And Catherine, well, this is a great segue into what's happening next week, where we hear from Heather Barnes of Hull City Council, who will be talking about the movement of the registration process into the family hubs. But Catherine, thanks for coming off mute there. Can you share a little bit of a sort of pre-see into that?
Yeah, well, I'm just glad that Heather's coming next week, because I was thinking, let's get Heather on. So that's brilliant. I mean, yeah, the idea with family hub policy is that family hubs are places where families, parents can easily access help and support. And so a key driver there is that fathers should be able and feel able to go in, ask for advice and information. And therefore, fathers should feel very comfortable in this environment, and we get rid of some of the barriers, because it's not just about a legal place or a system, it's a more relational place. So my hope would be that this might help, but I don't know enough about the ins and outs of the process of birth registration to know exactly what the opportunities might be as more and more local authorities think about bringing birth registration into family hubs based in the community. Is that helpful, Chris?
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing that. And I think going back to Ahmed's point way up in the chat about offering parenting classes very early on, could be done through the family hubs network and the family hub centers themselves, because it is that idea of a one-stop shop with signposting off to relevant services and support, and having that birth registration in that space could highlight complexities and challenges at a very, very early point in the whole process. Owen, I want to come to you.
I guess you've done a great job kind of going back and touching on the points I wanted to, which was kind of tying it together to Steve's presentation around the importance of parenting education and where and when do you engage parents, particularly fathers, to offer that support and help. The earlier you can do so, the better. We would say antenatally, I don't want to do a shameless plug for ourselves, but we run a course antenatally called Future Dads. And at that point, when we're educating men about what to expect from pregnancy and birth, we're also talking about, think about what you're going to do after the baby's here, your relationship, your own self-care, your finances. All of this are tied to your legal situation. Even if you don't choose to get married, sit down and have conversations now with your partner about what potentially could happen. Now, we all know the best laid plans sometimes end up on the floor, but you're protecting yourself. Beyond that, in terms of policy recommendations, linking this back in again, you know, surely when we create policies or there are existing laws, there is an onus on local and central government to promote people's rights and responsibilities. You have to educate the populace about laws, some of which have been in place for hundreds of years. But if it's gone out of common parlance or discussion, you know, the first time you become a parent, anyone here who's a parent remembers this, they have to tell you how to register the birth for your baby. No one's born with this knowledge. Before you were a parent, were you walking around going, oh yeah, one day when I'm a parent, I know where I have to go to register the birth for that baby? No, maybe you've come across the births, marriages, and deaths registration place once if you got married before you became a parent. But failing that, you wouldn't know. So if we decide as a society, the best place to do this is in a common space where people feel welcome and comfortable. And family hubs are a great start, but they've got a way to go as well to make men and fathers feel welcome in their spaces. But there's an onus and a duty on us as a society to put more into education, not just about the latest tax break or code or you know, new voter ID for voting, but also about things that affect our everyday lives, you know, and that starts at educating kids at school all the way through to people who are in the situation now. So the law shouldn't just be about changes to the law, which may include a bit like in other countries where you can't register the birth without a dad being informed unless you've got a very good reason or a rationale to not have him involved. That changes the inflection, so encourages people to discuss with that other parent, generally the man, even if we're not in a relationship, that we need to register this child together, you know. And then if he hides or he's not involved, you can genuinely say that rather than because I don't like him, I'm saying I don't know where he is type dynamic. But alongside with that expectation has to go a lot of investment in education and awareness raising with the general public.
Wow. We have I think we're kind of at that point now where it would be appropriate to wrap this session up. But I suppose one of the things that really comes through to me is that even in a small group today, there's a lot of expertise. There's a great deal of desire to making society better for everybody, but really thinking about how fathers are included in that process. And I mean, I just want to thank Steve, your presentation and the work that you're doing at the For Baby's Sake Trust. Look out on the BBC for the information about their work. I really want to thank Richard, your contributions. Really appreciate that. You were very open and honest and sharing the challenges within that. Catherine, thank you for highlighting the work that's taking place in terms of the birth registration into family hubs. Carmen, I see your comment there about young fathers not necessarily knowing what the family hubs are. So that is that's an area of development that we can all be considering. So thank you very much for highlighting that. And as I said, what a fantastic segue into next week when Heather Barnes will be talking about moving the birth registration process into the family hubs in Hull, because it provides an example for learning. And learning is not only a good thing. I mean, it's not like everything just moves in one linear path towards excellence. It's a bouncy process. And I think we'll hear from Heather about some of those bouncy moments towards an improved registration process. So at that note, I want to thank everybody for joining. Steve, I will put out on the website about how to join for meeting next week and through the social media. Thank you very much for highlighting that. Steve, is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion?
Sorry, Chris, searching endlessly for that unmute button. No, thank you much. It's been enlightening for us as well, and I'm going to take this forward in the work that we continue to do. And if anybody wants to contact me, it'd be more than helpful to you know, to do it in a less condensed way. Really, anything that we can do to support anybody would be great. But thank you very much for the opportunity, Chris.
Oh, Steve, thank you for adding in. And in terms of contacting Steve, I will share the presentation through social media so that you'll have Steve's email.
Brilliant.
Okay, well,
Thanks.
thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody joining. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone. The Zoom link for next week will go up. You won't have to book on. The Zoom link will appear on the website and we'll email to everyone on the mailing list. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. See you next week.
Take care.